What's up, guys? My name is Stephen Guadagni with 5 Tool Sports Science. Today, we're going to be talking about lower half pitching mechanics and how it can potentially help you gain velocity, okay? Let's start on this one. I'm going to talk to you about some of the basics, and then I'm going to kind of showcase some stuff here, all right? So this is Luis Castillo. Talk a little bit about, like, from the leg lift moving into your back leg load, okay? So from leg lift, riding momentum down into your hips, okay? Getting into a good back leg load position, okay? So this is one of the foundations of lower half mechanics, is learning how to come from leg lift, gain momentum down the mound, okay? And then load into the back leg, okay? This is very coachable for guys, of just getting into this better power position, okay? And then the next stage of this, what we'll talk about, is how we're going to transfer in biomechanics. We'll talk about angular velocity. So what that would look like on the mound is when you lift, you ride the mound, you ride your momentum down the mound, you get yourself into a good back leg load position, and then it's going to be, how are you using the ground to create rotation in the hip, okay? And so angular velocity is going to be measuring the rotational velocity of your pelvis, okay? And so we're going to be able to get a really good example of that with Luis Castillo, okay? So that's his back leg load position. Now, as we go farther down, we're going to start to see how he rotates that back hip. Okay, so he has a very rotational back leg. We're going to go through a few examples of some guys who get a lot more linear propulsion. Okay, but he's an example of a guy who really rotates that back leg and rotates that back hip right into front foot strike. So he's maximizing the stretch from his front leg all the way up the chain. So the hips are rotating open. If we get back on the mound, the hips are rotating open, and he's maintaining that stretch through his upper half, that hip to shoulder separation, and getting a good stretch, a diagonal line stretch all the way up to the arm, creating a ton of torque through the body, okay? That's going to be really the X factor, the key movement. In golf, they call hip to shoulder separation the X factor. And in pitching, it's kind of the same. Like high velocity throwers, they all generally get some amount of hip to shoulder separation, okay? All right, so next thing that's then going to happen, he's rotated the back leg, he's landed at front foot strike. Let me delete some of this. I didn't want to delete that much. Get me back to front foot strike. One sec, guys. Okay, so he's accelerated that back hip. Now he's landed his front leg. Now his front leg is going to need to decelerate his pelvis, so that's going to stop that forward momentum. So when he gets going, rotates the back hip, lands at foot strike, shoulders closed, nice separation. Now the front leg has to stop all of this forward momentum. If you're gonna leak on the front leg, you're gonna leak power and you're gonna leak pitching velocity. So that front leg needs to put on the brakes. It stops that forward momentum, okay? And now he's got that good stretch. He's built up all of that torque. Now the front leg is going to allow the trunk to whip and to rotate and even get some forward trunk tilt. And the arm just kind of comes along for the ride. So the trunk is then going to pull the arm through, and as the arm goes into layback and into ball release. So that's how the lower half is going to pass energy through the hip, through acceleration, into the front leg, block and decelerate this, okay? So that we can then transfer energy to the trunk, and then the trunk is delivering energy to the baseball. So let's watch how he does it. Watch this front leg here. He's going to start getting some what's called front leg extension. So another thing, let's make one more point here. In biomechanics, you're going to have what's called lead knee extension, okay? So how quickly he can go from here to there correlates to ball velocity, all right? So when your front leg lands in this angle, all right, and you're closed, and then your body starts to rotate, how quickly it goes from that angle into extension, it's called lead knee extension velocity. That correlates very highly with ball velocity. So he goes from that position, that front leg gets almost fully extended. His trunk shoots forward a little bit. He's gone through rotation. The arm goes into layback. The trunk is powering and pulling that arm through, and then he goes into ball release. Okay? So this, again, this is an example of a guy who he sequences it incredibly well. His coordination, his timing, his sequencing, this is awesome. Hip rotation, lands at foot strike, shoulders closed, good separation, right? And then a really good front leg block, all right? So that's a really good example of a rotational guy doing it. Now let's take a look at a couple of guys that get more linear. Let me see if I can find, oh, you know where I need to go? I need to go here. Okay, let's take a look at Spencer Strider and McClanahan. All right, so get to their position. All right, so there's a big debate in baseball, like where we're talking about should you just rotate off the mound or should you push off the mound? My opinion on that is like you kind of do both, and it depends on your style of throwing. So Spencer Strider actually has a really cool article where they talked about building his cheat code fastball. I think if you just Google that, you'd be able to find it. But he talks about how he built his lower half to create more extension down the mound and how he uses, drive off of the mound to build a longer stride length, okay, which then gets you closer to the hitter. And then just talk like how he is vertical attack angle, how he spins the ball, how he wants to attack with fastballs up. That extension helped his fastball play up. And it was a really cool article. So it really just shows that like you can use your back leg mechanics that then tie into ball flight metrics and pitch metrics using a TrackMan to get your pitches to play up. And that's from driving off of the mound, not just trying to rotate. All right. So Luis Castillo might have a shorter stride because he's just rotating. He's not creating as much propulsion. And there can be injury mechanisms to that. They got to do more studies on it. But potentially, Dr. Ryan Croton came out with a study called basically talking about ground force and linear propulsion and how there's a different energy transfer from your linear propulsion, like meaning a longer stride and a shorter stride, and how you're going to put less you'll have a better energy transfer to the arm and potentially put less torque on the arm with a longer stride. So there might be some injury mechanisms to it. That being said, both of these guys have both gotten injured. So there needs to be more studies on this. Let's go again. Okay, so both of them getting into their back leg load position, okay? And then what happens, you can see here, they really get off of the mound. You can see this like almost like a jump off of the mound where they are coming way, way off, and that's the linear aspect of the drive. So, this is popularized as like triple extension, a real push off the mound linear and drive out as far as you can. In early on in my career, I've been doing this for about 10, almost 11 years. I used to be big triple extension guy, but I did run into some issues with it. Mainly, I really think that you need to be able to still rotate the hip, which is what's happening here. So if you're doing a push off the mound, but this is happening, which is kind of what was happening with me, is you go to your load position and then you push off of the mound, but then you're stuck and your hip can't rotate. And that happens a lot with dudes. So it's like you've created some linear propulsion, but now your hip can't rotate. So you're not getting that angular velocity and you're going to get a poor transfer of power through your hips. And then ultimately, if you can't transfer it well through the hips, it's not going to transfer well to the trunk and it's not going to transfer well to the arm. Okay, so they are still able to get this linear propulsion, but you can see that this hip internally rotates for both of them, and they're still landing with some degree of rotation. So you'll see the ankle kick over, the hips have cleared a little bit, and if you watch closely, like as they're going into that linear extension, you can see this femur kind of rotate in and the hips open. All right, so that's a key thing, and that requires a lot of hip mobility to be able to do it. But this is an example of guys that get a lot more linear and a lot more stride length, and it still works. I mean, they're both, I think Spencer Strider, I don't know if he's touched 100, but he's definitely upper 90s, and Shane McClanahan, I think, has definitely been triple digits, so they make it work for them. But still the key, same thing, when they're landing at front foot strike, you can see the separation if we draw lines. Their shoulders are closed, they're landing at front foot strike, longer strides, but they're still in that shoulder closed position, all right? Now let's watch what they do with their front legs. So McClanahan, that's really good. He's getting that full extension, and same thing with Strider. You know, big front leg extension, driving that body into forward trunk tilt. All right. So that's an example of just like two different styles of back legs. There's the rotational guy, there's the linear propulsion guy, the drive guy, if you will. And that's going to be predicated on your style of throwing. That's something, you know, that you're going to have to figure out for yourself. Like, are you a better just pure rotator? Do you add some of the linear into it? You know, that's based off of each individual guy. Okay. Um, and then the front leg, let's talk just a little bit more about that. The front leg to me is one of the biggest correlations to ball velocity. This is so key. What you'll see with most low velocity guys is they cannot decelerate the front leg. They can't block that energy and get any extension back. And if you can fix that, you actually have a higher correlation to ball velocity from your front leg than you do from the back leg. The back leg, you know, the studies are kind of, it definitely helps, but it might help more so for arm health than it does pitching velocity. But if you can land separated and have a big front leg, that's definitely going to help you with pitching velocity. Okay. Let's just look at one last thing. I want to show you guys one example here of, oops, I went to screenshots. This is a guy that I trained back in 2022, not Luis Castillo. This is this guy. And he gained 4 miles per hour in a summer of training. If you want to go watch that video on how we did it, it's actually really cool. It's on my Instagram. It's how Christian Clayson went from 89 to 93 miles per hour. Okay, but this is going to show you some of the motion capture. So we would do a motion capture and we're going to look at the energy transfers. All right, so this is going to kind of put the biomechanics into perspective for you guys of what's happening. All right, so goes into his load position. Okay, now he starts to rotate his back hip. Here we've got our chart. So this is going to be angular velocity of the pelvis. So this light green line is going to be his pelvis. That dark green line is going to be his trunk. And we can really see what's called kinematic sequencing here. All right. So this is his first peak of his hip rotation. All right. And you can't see it, but over here you would have his velocity in degrees per second. Okay. But the key of this is the timing. So this is frame rate. This is timing in the delivery. Timing and coordination and sequencing of the lower half is so important, guys. He peaks his rotation right into front foot strike. All right. So he's landing at front foot strike. Boom. His hips are open. Okay. His shoulders are closed. And when we look at the chart, he peaked his hips. Over here is when he's going to peak his trunk. That would be proper kinematic sequencing. All right. Now, another thing, we'll look at the deceleration. Here, when he gets to this, you can see this drop off. That's what's going to be deceleration in the front leg. And he's still decelerating, even though he doesn't get a ton of front leg extension, but that's really where he would need to work, is getting better at that front leg decel. All right. So he's kind of just like holding it. He doesn't really get any extension. But this is how you can kind of pair the data to see what you need to work on. So he's awesome at the sequencing aspect of it, of powering his hip rotation, landing closed at front foot strike, lots of hip to shoulder separation, and then passing that energy to the trunk is just where it peaks right here. All right, so there's the trunk peaking. That's the proper kinematic sequence of how the energy is flowing from his hips to the trunk and then ultimately to the arm. Okay, but what he would need to work on is getting better at front leg braking and deceleration to get some more front leg extension and pass energy back up, which would then give his trunk a little bit more forward trunk tilt, which forward trunk tilt has a correlation to ball velocity as well. All right, so like what we'll look at from the back, see it from the back here. You can see the hips rotate, so that hip goes first, the shoulder stays closed and separated. That's a really terrible arrow, but that's okay. All right, one more view. We'll look at the overhead view, okay? Counter rotation, loaded back, pelvis is going underneath him, okay? So the hips are going first, he's keeping the trunk closed. He lands at front foot strike. He's passed the energy through his pelvis, right? He's landing closed, all right? He's built up all of that torque, okay? And now the trunk is gonna pull the arm through, okay? The arm goes into layback, out into ball release. Okay, so that's the proper kinematic sequencing. So I think that pretty much covers the basics of the lower half mechanics. of looking at the back leg and how it's accelerating, the front leg, how it's decelerating, and how you're using that to drive hip to shoulder separation, trunk power, and then ultimately that transfers to the baseball. And we're going to do more mechanical breakdowns talking more about the trunk and the arm path and other key things as well. So I hope it helps, guys. Like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.